Welcome to our Renewable Energy Forum, Real Solutions for a Sustainable Future. Thank the Lions Club of Oxford and the Rotary Club of Oxford for all their help in getting this presentation for your benefit. This night is for the benefit of you, for our community and our planet. Thank you for being here. After the presentations, which will last no longer than 1 hour, we'll start promptly at 6:45. There will be a few minutes for questions and answers, and then there are refreshments that I hope nobody skipped dinner, but you can have it after the question and answer period if you did. All right, there's plenty of refreshments in the back. We hope you'll stay and enjoy them. Have some conversation. Let all that information that you're going to hear, this wonderful new good news, mull around in your brains, and you can talk about it while you're getting something to munch on. So enjoy the presentations. I think I covered everything I need to. No, I didn't. I'd like to just take a minute to, I hope that everybody's had a chance to visit the tables in the back. We have a lot of exhibitors and vendors, but I'd quickly like to thank them for being here. We have Dave Austin from Great Brook Solar. We have Gabe Knopf from ETM Solar. Both will also speak for a short time. We have Jan Myers from, I'm going to give you the wrong company. Jan Myers from, Sunvestment Incorporated, I'm sorry. We have the Miller family here with biomass production. We have Brad Vickers here from the Chenango County Farm Bureau, who's been here for biodiesel information and much other renewable energy programs that he's initiated. We have Earl Callahan with industrial use and growth of hemp. And I hope I'm not missing anybody. Fenner Wind Farm has a table back here with Dr. Phil Hoffmeyer, who's one of our main presenters, and that's talking about wind energy. We'll also discuss some geothermal. There's so much, I'm very, very limited in my own knowledge, so I can't wait to hear the speakers present as well. But I hope I thanked everyone, acknowledged everyone, and most importantly, Lauren and Siggy from the Lions and all the Lions, all the Rotarians, if you could just give a hand, we'd like to thank you for getting this arrangement. All of you. And I'll make one last plug for Rotarians and Lions. We would both love to have you be part of this program. Thank you very much. And now I'll introduce Dr. Phil Hoffmeyer from SUNY Morrisville, who is going to present for us some wonderful information on a bright new world. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here this evening. I'm Phil Hoffmeyer from Morrisville State College, and one of the things that I wanted to do in 20 or 25 minutes or so is give us just a quick overview of renewable energy, kind of as a primer. What is it about renewable energy that is guiding kind of the ship that's moving right now? And what are some of the kind of basic things that we can learn about renewable energy, and a little bit about energy efficiency as well? What I want to cover real quickly is just a couple combinations of things. I wanted to look a little bit about how we consume energy in the house, and how that would really influence the kind of energy system that we would be interested in. Once we understand those kinds of things, then we can really start exploring options of what's out there. Because a lot of times what happens is there's confusion about the kind of energy system that someone would like to have and the kind of energy system that they really need. And I think that's important for us to be able to work through some of this. And we'll talk a little bit about why we're investing in renewable energy right now as a nation, as a state, as individuals. One of the other things I want to point out is of all the speakers who will be up here tonight, we're all not just believers in renewable energy. Every one of us, in fact, lives our lives with renewable energy. And I like to start off with a picture of my house. A picture of my house has a solar system on it, as well as some other things. Because to me, it's important not just to preach something, but to live it. It's a lifestyle. And that's hopefully something I can share with you a little bit more as we go on today. I always like to start here. This is the largest area of misconception that a lot of us have, is how we consume energy in the home. And not only how we consume it, but how much do we actually consume. And one of the interesting things is, if we look at 16 years worth of data, it's 16 years worth of us talking about things like energy efficiency. We've actually increased the amount of energy that the average home consumes in the United States, which seems somewhat counterintuitive, but it's reality. One thing that has shifted pretty drastically, though, is kind of how we consume that energy. We've shifted away from being a really dominant heating and cooling energy consumer, and now what we're doing is we're tightening up homes, we're doing a lot of insulation, but we're becoming really more heavily addicted to things like electronics. So our electricity consumption is going up. And so this is one of the things that we have to be aware of, is how do we consume energy versus what kind of energy system could meet that need. But in either case, notice that at least half of our energy load is heating and cooling, thermal processes, hot water, heating up our homes in the winter and cooling them in the summer. That is a huge amount of our energy consumption, which leads us then to think about what kind of energy systems do we need. In addition to thinking about energy systems, one of the things that we really are tasked with is reducing the energy consumption that we have. This is the first step. Always reduce your load. It's absolutely critically important. In fact, Emery Lovins, he's a theoretical physicist, but he's also the co-founder of a group called Rocky Mountain Institute. And he gave a wonderful talk on how we can meet our energy solutions. And one of the things that he says that's really important is, when we look at society, we have a tendency to want to solve problems with expensive solutions. But the best way to meet our energy demand is to not consume that energy in the first place. In fact, what he says is that the cheapest power is that which you do not need to consume. And that's something that's absolutely critically fundamental before you even take the first step towards a renewable energy system. Reduce that load. There are lots of ways of doing this. First step is always get a home energy audit. There are lots of companies offering them. Most people fail on the follow-through, though. You can't just stop with the audit, you have to follow its recommendations. And there's a lot of low-hanging fruit, things like wrapping your water tank in a blanket. Just simple insulation, things that cost $7 and 20 minutes of time, lead to dramatic energy savings. Make sure you have insulation. Even if you're going to watch TV, make sure you're choosing something that's energy efficient. Shift away from a plasma TV to something like an LED. Those are real kinds of dollars and cents that are important to do before you even remotely consider putting something on the roof of your house. You have to address that component first. One of the other important things is to realize, if you're on one of the major electrical companies, NYSEG or National Grid or one of those, you've already made investments in renewable energy. And it's through what's known as the Renewable Portfolio Standard, or the System Benefits Charge. Every time you pay your electricity bill, you pay into a fund that then gets later delved out to solve energy issues. So when we talk about things like funding opportunities, lots of those funding opportunities are not paid through taxes, but they're paid through those who consume energy on a regular basis. So that's something to take advantage of, is that we've already paid into this fund, so you might as well get something back. Well, the Renewable Portfolio Standard in New York State, and many other states are in the same boat that we are. The focus of this program is to change how we produce electricity. And New York State's goal is, by 2015, to produce 30% of our state's electricity from renewable sources. And that's a pretty ambitious goal, pretty ambitious. The question is, how are we doing? If we look at a map of this through New York State, and this is the most recent update that they put out, we can see where the distribution is of these are our main tier projects. So these are big projects that feed directly onto the grid that don't go through a consumer's household. So we can see that the distribution, wind, hydro, bioenergy, those things all show up on this map. One of the other things that we can look at is look at these technologies kind of individually. If I look at the big industrial wind farms that have gone, when the program started, there were relatively few wind farms. And once the program began and the RPS really took off, we have some pretty substantial wind products. that are installed in New York, and that's really common for people to see, our industrial wind farms these days. So in the wind world, there's an upward progress. There's some debate of what will happen in the next 2 years or so, but the trend is certainly clear and certainly obvious. Now, if I look at smaller wind systems, those are being installed at an individual's home, the story is changing a little bit here as well. So the darker the color green, the more what are known as customer sited tier, those that are installed at a residence. We can see how these are shaping up. So counties in and around Lake Ontario, they have pretty good wind in that area, pretty good wind coming off of Lake Erie. So those are places that are getting installations. As you get towards the center of the state, the wind resource is a little bit more challenging. So wind is going to be one of these really tricky things, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. If I were to look at solar PV, this is really what's driving a lot of the renewable portfolio standard, at least at the residential level, and we're now starting in the last year or so to really see this picking up pretty good legs in the commercial sector. But if we look at capacity that's installed, the years have been cut off here, but these are the last 2 years, and what we can see is that there's a tremendous push in New York State to get solar installed. And the trend is only going to continue going upward. One of the other issues that we can look at is how solar PV is being installed across the state. And there are all sorts of structures put in place now that try to make sure that places are having adequate access to resources to be able to install solar all throughout the state. So there are specific counties that are doing quite well. Chenango's got a little bit of work to do, which is a good thing. I see this as opportunity, right? We can catch up to other areas that are around us. In and around the greater New York City metropolitan area, going slightly more upstate, lots of installs have occurred in through here and along the I-90 corridor. So we can see that there are some regional parts to this that we have to tell. One of the greatest overlooked resources is solar thermal, which again to me is really interesting considering 17 to 20% of our energy consumed in the house is done just for heating hot water. And so I do a little bit of head scratching and say, well, why is that the case? And there are a bunch of reasons for this. And it has to do with how markets are incentivized and ease of installation and understanding. But to me, this is another really big untapped market, is getting solar thermal systems installed because this is such a big energy consumption that we have in the house. Again, this blank map to me says lots and lots of opportunity and the market will respond. So the question that we should be asking is if our goal is 30% by 2015, how are we doing? If we look at just progress as a percent, customer sited tier, this is for most of us in the room, you and I putting these on our properties. We're only at 57% of the total target by 2015. If we look at main tier, these are the big projects, right, that are feeding the grid, that's only 48%. So if we look at it at a bulk total, we're about halfway there. And this program's been enacted for several years. So the cynic in me would say, okay, they're just going to jump ship and forget about this partway through. Until we start looking at the funding, this has already been earmarked. So if I look at this, these are in millions of dollars. So when we look at values down here in excess of $2 billion that are going toward renewable energy projects, this is a pretty important aspect that we're dealing with, right? If I add all these things up, we're looking at about $3 billion that's been earmarked to make sure that we're getting renewable energy where we need it. To me, this only says future. That's it. We have to meet these goals, and there's lots of opportunity, lots of funding, and lots of political will, to get us there. So, opportunity is here. In order to really talk about this opportunity a little bit, what I wanted to do is tell a little bit about how I got to where I am and how I've interacted with this opportunity. And it started in 2008 when I got hired at Morrisville State College, and I did some house shopping. And I had two criteria. My first criterion was that I wanted an all-electric house. The reason I wanted an all-electric house is I know I can produce electricity on my own. I can't produce number 2 fuel oil. I can't produce petroleum. I can't produce natural gas, but I can produce electricity. That was my first criteria. The second one is my wife is a potter, so I had to have a house that I could build a pottery studio in. So that one also kind of set specific houses aside. Well, so I wanted an all-electric household, but I know that thermal energy is a big portion of this. And if that's the case, I had to really start with thermal processes. Because if I had an all-electric house, that meant that a substantial amount of my electricity was going to be dealing with thermal processes. So what I did was deal with that aspect of it. And what I wanted to start off with is a solar hot water system. This is the easiest. This is like the gentle introduction to renewable energy. For, $3,000 out of pocket, you can be introduced to renewable energy in a very meaningful way. So that's where I wanted to start. And these are just two examples of collectors. We have flat plate collectors over here in evacuated tubes. And putting aside a whole bunch of different arguments that a bunch of solar installer geeks would really care about, they're effectively equivalent, more or less. Unless you want very specific things, but more or less. They both heat up hot water pretty well. If I think about what a solar hot water system is, it's pretty simple. Let's start with a basic hot water system. For most houses in this area, we have hot water tanks. So this might be a 60, 70, 80 gallon hot water tank. We bring cold water in, electric heating elements, or whatever you might be having, natural gas will heat that water up, and that goes out to fixtures because we want hot water. A really simple system. Well, if I want to take that and interact that with a solar hot water system, again, this is pretty simple. If I knock out a bunch of bells and whistles, I have a hot water tank now, but what I'm going to do is introduce a pump that's going to circulate relatively cool water up to a collector where the sun heats it up now. We'll bring that hot water back into the tank. That hot water rises to the top of the tank and we pull that out so we can heat hot water. And the simplest system to do is to integrate two tanks. One that does just this, using solar energy, and the existing tank that we have. And it's really simple now. We just bring cold water in, let a tank preheat the water with the solar system. We take the hot water out of that, which becomes the cold water inlet to our existing hot water tank. So this tank, which has two electric heating elements, is doing a whole lot less work. So we're taking energy from the sun, preheating it, coming into our conventional tank, and going out fixtures. This is a really, really simple way of doing it, and it's actually a really efficient way of heating hot water. So this is where I wanted to start my process. The question is, how much do we need? And I'll keep this pretty general. A family of four, depending on your hot water consumption, will typically need 2 or 3 collectors, something like 4 foot by 8 foot collectors, with something like a 60 to 80 gallon storage tank. And we can get really finite with this and still end up with about the same result. So we'll just be pretty simple here and pretty general. Like I said, this is a simple system to get introduced to in a lot of different ways. The cost of this installed, again, I'm just ballparking here for what's common, is about $9,000, give or take. The cool thing is that we have a lot of incentives out there. So a homeowner doesn't actually pay this $9,000. There are federal and state tax incentives that are available. So if you have tax liability of any kind, then you can take a 30% federal tax reduction off of your system, and then you can take a 25% state tax reduction off of your system. And that applies to what your out-of-pocket cost is, and I'll show you a little bit about how that works. The real challenge with solar hot water, though, is that the funding, one of the funding sources that's available is through this RPS, or System Benefits Charge, which you only pay into if you're paying electricity. So the only way to recoup that is if you have an electric hot water tank. And a lot of people get frustrated if they have natural gas or propane because they can't take advantage of this particular, at least not easily, they can't take advantage of this because it has to be based on electricity. So it's $1.50 per displaced kilowatt hour, and that leads into all sorts of fun mathematics, and I'm going to skip a bunch of that. But what I'll focus on is that you can max this out at $4,000 per system, per cell. So if I were to just make that general assumption that I can max this out based on how we design the system, we would receive this a $4,000 credit. That usually goes to the installer directly, so the homeowner never has to pay the full $9,000. They pay a reduced cost because this money goes to the installer. So your out-of-pocket cost is $5,000. And now we get to apply tax incentives. I'm really not going to get into a complex financial analysis here. When I did my system, I talked to my tax advisor and we did all sorts of things. I'm not going to get into that really. Just say that they're out there. So if I just do a simple system here, A 30% federal tax credit is about $1,500, and the state tax credit of 25% is $1,250. So now if I look at what the effective cost is, $2,200 is what it would cost for me to install a solar thermal system and really put my foot in the water in a meaningful way into the world of renewable energy. And these work great. So if I were to also look at this, one of the other neat things is if I assume about a 20-year lifespan of this, I don't want to get too much into the math of this, but if I'm displacing this amount of electricity every year by heating it up with hot water, it costs me only 3 cents per kilowatt hour to heat my water for the next 20 years. And I will say this over and over and over again. One of the best things about renewable energy, the very best things, is that you have stabilized energy costs. It doesn't matter what the utility does, whether the prices go up or down or fluctuate left, right, it doesn't matter. Once you install one of these systems, you have stabilized energy costs for the life of the system. That's huge. Hugely, hugely important to us, to me. Now, part of my system is I wanted an all-electric house. But the side to that I wasn't excited about was the house that we ended up buying had electric baseboard heating. I wasn't terribly excited about living inside of a toaster. I mean, that's all a toaster is resistance electric heating. I didn't want that. It's not comfortable. So I wanted to do something different. I come from forest industry, so to me it was really important to deal with biomass. I wanted wood, cordwood. I love cutting wood and splitting wood. It's fun. So the system I invested in is a gasification unit. And without getting into a lot of this, the way that it works is you have staged combustion. So the top chamber, this is the one that's in my garage, this is what it looks like on a diagram. The top chamber is where you put the wood in. You light a fire as normal and it's fan controlled. And a fan drives, this is a low oxygen, high temperature condition that drives carbon monoxide and hydrogen gas out of the wood. And then it combusts it later with secondary air that you introduce later on. And so you get a really clean, controlled, high temperature burn. Really highly efficient, very few particulates come out of it, and you have just better emission control in general. In the back of this is some water, so it goes through some baffling, it heats up the water in the back of this chamber, and then I use this for a radiant and a hot water baseboard system in my house. So it's electrically controlled, but the thermal process is all done with biomass, which is relatively inexpensive. So I was able to get a good handle on that big energy expense in my house. I just put this up as a splash screen. Wood gasification is taking off right now. The days of the outdoor wood boiler that looks, like a little house and smokes all over the place, those are they're long gone. They're getting daylighted. Many towns will have ordinances against them these days. So if you're looking to do bioenergy kinds of things, it has to be high efficiency. And so there are lots of companies out there striving to get high efficiency gasification units out. Many of them are shifting away from cordwood, going to a quote unquote more convenient market using pellets. Again, it's a much more consistent fuel and they work fantastic. So biomass heating is changing dramatically. The other thing I wanted to do was put in a solar system. So what I said normally is a family of 4 will typically use 2 or 3 collectors, and I have 6 on my house. Way more than it seems that I would need to produce hot water. What I really wanted to do was to put my solar thermal system in with my wood gasification unit, and the 2 systems work together, so that I can do hot water and space heating at the same time, using either system depending on whether or not it's sunny outside. So that's what I did. In my basement, I have a 550-gallon storage tank that allows me to collect energy, whether from the wood or from the sun, and store it. And then off of this, I pull several different heating loops, and there's lots of stuff going on inside of here. But part of this runs hot water baseboard, part of it runs a radiant heating system, part of it runs my domestic hot water. So I have a big, massive storage that allows me to access energy when I need it, and allows me to store energy when I don't necessarily need it, but it's available. And that's one of the things that provides really good opportunities is system integration of lots of different kinds of systems. before I move too much further, people get really excited about heating their home with solar hot water in the winter. First thing is to be realistic about it. It's really challenging to do. Really, really challenging. And the reason it's really challenging to do is because there's an energy mismatch. The time I need the most heat is in the winter. The time when there's the least sun is in the winter. So if I'm reliant on the sun, I have to live with that reality. And that reality to me was, okay, so I need to heat with wood much of the time. And I do. So the easiest way to deal with solar thermal is to focus on the summer and the shoulder seasons. Right? Spring, summer, and fall, that's when you're really dependent on a solar thermal system, and they work beautifully. If you really try to design a system for wintertime loads, it's going to be a challenge and it's going to be expensive, amongst some other issues that we have. But it's an easy way to get into this market. The economics of my system are a little fishy. Because I self-installed it, I did all the design work, I put it in before incentives. I'll just cut to the chase. Really simply, I have a pretty substantial energy saving every year because I bought an all-electric house. If I were to just look at simple economics, I have a 5-year payback on my system. It's already paid for itself. So I have the next 20 years or however long its lifespan is, where the only thing I need to pay for is general maintenance. If I look at that as a return on investment, for the dollars I spent, I have about a 20% return on investment. That's way better than any checking account, savings account, or stock that I own right now. That's why I think of renewable energy as a future, is something really simple like that. The payback is what people talk about a lot. The return on investment to me speaks volumes about how money is invested and what the real return is on it. Now, if I shift away from those loads, thermal loads, I'm going to talk just briefly about 2 electrically based systems. One is wind systems. People get really excited about wind, or they really hate it. It's a really polarizing technology with very few people in the middle. Wind, you have lots of options, but they come as kits. So the size that you order and the type of structure that they're on varies depending on the kind of system you're interested in. So we can talk about something like this. It's a Berge XL on a 10 kilowatt machine, or a 10 kilowatt machine on what's known as a guide lattice tower. And one of the beauties of these is that the tower kind of disappears the further you get away from it. It's kind of a nice, attractive feature. This is a 50 kilowatt machine in endurance. It's one that one of my students, he was actually standing right there in this picture. They're doing some maintenance on this machine, former student, I should say, what's known as a self-supporting lattice tower. So this looks kind of like the Eiffel Tower. Kind of another neat structure. The other kinds of typical systems, it's the most commonly installed system in the United States for electricity production. It used to be the Southwest Wind Power SkyStream. It's now bought by Xeris, I think. Anyway, it's a small system, 2.5 kilowatts, on what's known as a monopole tower. The only point I want to get across here is if you're entering the world of wind, there are lots of options. And the challenge with lots of options is you really have to understand the technology. The simple thing about the technology is to know how it integrates with what you have already. And if I were to look at a wind system, going through a bunch of electrical components, the end point that I wanted to show you is the only thing that this will do is feed into a normal breaker in your house. So inside your main panel box where you have all your breakers, pretty much any of the electrically based systems are just going to backfeed into that box. So it operates under normal operating conditions, and then that just backfeeds out to the utility. So the way it operates is pretty simple. If you have electricity needs in your house and it's windy outside, the wind energy that's produced goes to feed your other existing loads in your house, like your lights, your TV, toasters, those kinds of things. But picture it windy at night when you're asleep. What that will then do is go out to the utility, and it does what's called net metering, and I think Dave is going to talk a little bit about net metering, so I don't want to be redundant. So there are some really simple ways to integrate these systems with your existing electrical system in your house. Really, really straightforward. I promise not to get too math heavy, but I have to do this because it's the only way to really help understand wind. And wind energy is explained really simply with a kinetic energy equation that's just been manipulated slightly. And again, my point here isn't to focus on this, but if I were to look at this equation, it's only got 3 components that are really useful. Air density, the windswept area, or how big the rotor is that's interacting with the wind, and the velocity of the wind. And so if I look at an equation, I can ask two very simple questions. The variable that would be most important in this is the wind velocity. And the reason I know it's the most important is because it has a cubic relationship. So any small change you have in velocity, up or down, is going to lead to dramatic changes in the output of the machine. So that's the first. The other one is which one do I have most control over. At my house, I really can't change the ambient wind speed. I'd love to, but I can't. But I can change what size rotor diameter I have by selecting a different piece of equipment. So I can manipulate that area term pretty well. The reason why this is important is to understand wind. You have to understand how it's driven. And it's driven principally by velocity more than anything else. And if I were to just look at this region, the highest wind speeds I can find are just north of Norwich on this ridge. And if I look at this highest wind speed that we have available to us, most of us don't live there. And that's our reality. Most of us think we live in windy locations and say it's windy all the time, but it's not, it's breezy. If you actually want to produce energy from the wind, it has to be windy. So much so that you hate the wind. As soon as you borderline hating the wind, you borderline on when you might almost think about a wind system. And not until that time. So in order to talk about the economics of wind systems, I can't do that. It's really, really tricky. And the reason it's tricky is because they're based on wind velocity. And how a given system will have a different value to you based on how windy it is at your site, which gets really complicated, really, really complicated. There is still a federal tax credit of 30%. There's no state tax credit. And the NYSERDA incentive is complex. And the reason it's complex is because it's based on how much projected output you have out of the system, which gets into additional complexity of how do you analyze a site. And the only reason I want to get into this is if you're interested in wind, it's really complex to read through all the different kinds of things you have to be aware of, because there's a lot of them, about assumptions that people make of how a system is going to perform. And if you look at historical wind installations, most people are excited about wind when it gets installed, and are really unhappy 5 to 10 years later, because they were over guaranteed an energy estimate that's underperforming on the machine. And it all comes down to that velocity term. And most people are not really good at estimating that velocity term, and in all fairness, it's hard to do. I have a full course and a half based just on getting that velocity term, and it's hard. So if I were to think of the economics of wind systems, it's just tricky. It's very site-specific, and the reality is most of us don't live in a windy enough world. It would be great if we all did, because I love wind systems. I absolutely love them, but they're only good for very specific individuals. Other than that, it's a lawn ornament that's fairly expensive. So you have to be careful. Solar PV I'm going to leave off. This is the driver, really, of the electricity side of the renewable energy market in New York State. This is driving our RPS standard right now, at least at the customer-sided tier, and it looks like it's going to start moving into larger systems. But we have two experts here that are going to talk about that. So I'm not going to spend too much time talking about this right now. Dr. Gaykinoff from ETM SolarWorks, who I've known, I don't know, since probably 2008. I think I sat in one of her courses, actually. So she's here to talk a little bit about commercial systems. Dave Austin from Great Brook Solar is going to focus a little bit on residential systems. So I'm not going to talk about PV. I'll let them give that much better justice than I could as well. If I start thinking about renewable energy, though, as I start framing it, the question I always ask is where are we heading? I ask this a lot because I have students. Students are my focus. I'm not an installer. I don't have a business. My business is in education, and I want my students to get jobs. And I want them to get good jobs. So I ask myself, where are we heading? And it doesn't take much. Where we started with that portfolio standard, we're not there yet. We're only halfway to where we need to be, and there's a lot of funding to get us the rest of the way. Well, that's pretty simple math. It's a great field to be in, and it will continue to be so. So much so that I have more job offerings for my students than I have students to fill the positions. That's a great position for me to be in. great for your students as well. And really, when I start thinking about this, opportunities everywhere. Renewable energy is an installation. It's not the design. It's everything. You have to run a business, so all the economics that are involved, the marketing, the sales, maintenance. I mean, this is, initial R&D. There's a ton of work that's available. So again, when I start thinking about where are we heading, every business right now is on the energy efficiency and renewable energy kick. And the reality is a business cannot stay in business anymore unless they handle their energy solutions. And really the only way to do that is by stabilizing energy costs. The only way to do that is through renewable energy systems. And it's not because I'm a champion of renewable energy, it's reality. It's absolutely reality today in today's market of getting a handle on your energy costs. So the reality is this train is moving forward. We can either watch the train go by and say, it's new age, it's too techno-geekery for me, or you hop on the train. And if you're on the train, you actually levelize your energy costs starting today. If you ignore that train, you're on a variable energy market that, good luck, you will be. There's no other opportunity for us like there is right now. With that, I thank you for having me here this afternoon.
I'm Dave Austin, Great Brook Solar, formerly Great Brook Enterprises. Many of you might remember that name. I started the business right here in Chenango County in 1978, right out of college. And I'm your hometown solar guy. What I'm going to talk about today is how solar works, how photovoltaics in particular works. What is net metering, the incentive programs and tax credits, and what are some financing options that help you pay for the system, and why go solar. I'll give some things about the environmental benefits and the economics. Basically how a photovoltaic panel works is either the cells are made of two different materials. And when they are exposed to light, the photons of the light, sunlight, strike one material and cause a migration of electrons across a junction. Anytime you have a motion of electrons, you have electricity, direct current. And you connect a load, and that completes the circuit. The basic components of the system are a solar array, usually on the roof, it can be ground mounted, and an inverter. The inverter changes the direct current to alternating current that's compatible with power line and your appliances. This is basically what solar panels look like. And that's what an inverter looks like. And the inverter feeds electric directly into your breaker panel or any place on your side of the utilities meter. And it powers the loads in the house first. And then if anything's left over, things turn off or whatever, the extra goes back out on the power line. And the utilities meter credits you at retail. It's called net metering. We'll get into that in a little bit. There are various ways that solar panels can be mounted. Roof mounting is the most typical, but you can pole mount them. That has the benefit of being able to change the tilt with the seasons. And also you can face it directly south if your roof doesn't face south or if the roof is shaded. These are various forms of ground mounts. This one's kind of a cross between a ground mount and a pole mount. They're all fastened together. This is at the Waterville Public Library up in Waterville. It's about 20 kilowatt. This one's about 10 kilowatt. Each of these is 5 kilowatt. They're ballasted with concrete. It doesn't have to go very deeply into the earth. The latest way of mounting them is with post driving. It's very much like they put in the guardrails along the side of the road. driving machine. It doesn't require any concrete, and therefore minimizes the cost of doing ground mount. It's not, for at least 10 kilowatt and larger, it doesn't cost much more to do this than it does to do a roof mount. Net metering is a rate that the utility credits you or allows you for your backfed energy. It's not the same thing as your interconnection, which is your physical connection to the grid. They're two different things. The way net metering works is that at times of overproduction, like in the summer or during the day, you bank up your kilowatt hours towards your nighttime usage and your wintertime usage. And the power company credits the kilowatt hours, not the money. So the way it works is, say during any given month during the year, you have a net overproduction or net credit. They credit it towards the next month's bill. And they keep doing that from month to month up to 12 months. If you have, at the end of 12 months, you still have a net negative bill or a net credit, they will continue to credit, but now the rate is no longer retail, it's wholesale, or what the utility calls avoided cost. So at least with residential, it doesn't pay to grossly oversize your system. They don't mind you 100% offsetting your usage, but it's not as economically viable to go larger. Now, some things that the utilities may not want you to know about net metering is that it's important to choose your anniversary date at the end of the winter. The anniversary date is the default anniversary date, is the date that your system goes into operation. Doesn't matter what time of year, it's the date that it goes into operation. And if you don't request that to be changed, that will be the anniversary date. Now, if that happens to be in the fall, at the end of the summer when you've built up all your credits, then they become less worthwhile because they'll be crediting at wholesale rather than retail. So the idea is you want to have that anniversary date like in March, at the end of the winter, so that you can use up your credits at retail that you've built up during the summer. And the utilities don't tell you, but you do have a choice, a one-time choice to change your anniversary date from the time your system goes into operation to whatever date you want. We suggest the end of the winter. Now, because the utilities bank up the kilowatt hours and not the money, I don't think they figured out that if they change the rate during the course of the year, and you've built up your credits at a lower rate, say during the summer, and they jack up your rates in the winter, when you're cashing in those, it's to your benefit. Because you're cashing them in at a higher rate. Now, the benefits of adding solar PV to your home is that it's cheaper long-term power than utility purchase power. And it's environmentally sound. It offsets carbon dioxide production at fossil fuel produced power plants. And it causes your home to be more cost efficient to operate. It costs less to operate your house or business. And it increases the property value. An example of that, there was a study done where two identical houses next door to each other, one with solar, one without, they had similar utility usage. The one with solar, because they could prove that with past electric bills and current ones, that the solar to reduce the cost to operate the house. The house with the solar system sold first and commanded a higher price. And when you're considering the economics of solar, there's three things to consider. The return on investment. It is an income-producing asset, unlike most anything else you buy. You buy a car, it starts depreciating in value the moment you drive it off the lot. A solar system actually makes you money. And that's money that you no longer have to pay to the utility. And you can use that money to literally help pay for the system with the right financing. So that your net out of pocket is very little. The other thing is that it's cheaper electricity over the long haul. I have a graph that shows that. The payback period is the break-even point, or the point after which the system, you're producing free power. So those are three different ways to look at the economics. And then there's the societal benefit that it's very difficult to put a dollar value on. If we could, if you could tell me how much a human life is worth, we could put that into the economic formula. We have to protect the environment. Now, the incentives are, at the moment, NYSERDA pays 90 cents a watt. That's based on the wattage of the rated capacity of the solar array, towards the cost of the system. And the newest thing is that you can now get that incentive if you are on a municipal or an electric co-op. Previous to this year, you were not able to do that. But I believe that was part of the governor's incentive towards solar. The tax credits, the federal tax credits that Phil talked about. 30% of the cost you can take directly off your federal income tax. There's no upper limit. You can carry that over for up to 2 years. The state has a 25% income tax credit, and that's capped at $5,000. And you can carry that over up to 5 years if you can't claim it all in 1 year. The incentive eligibility for NYSERDA is that you need to be paying into the system's benefits charge, or the renewable portfolio standard that Phil talked about on your electric bill. And you have to have an interconnection agreement with your utility. You have to have their written permission to do it. And one of the things we do as an installer is do all that paperwork for you to get it. There are several ways to finance a system. There's leasing, and related to leasing is a power purchase agreement. And it's an excellent choice for those who don't qualify for tax credits. Not everyone qualifies for tax credits. You have to be paying tax or have tax liability to qualify, to credit the credits against. So for instance, a nonprofit organization, a governmental entity, they're not paying taxes. They can benefit from a leasing program or a power purchase agreement. And if you have, you plan to own your home a long time, that's an opportunity. Leasing is a service you pay extra for. And then there's traditional financing. And with those, you can claim your tax credits. There are maintenance contracts and web-based monitoring with financing, and even direct purchase, just like there is with leasing. To compare, if you were to purchase your next 30 years of electricity, right now what you are doing is the most expensive thing you can do. That's renting your power from the power company. The next less expensive thing is leasing. And the next less expensive thing is to purchase the system with a loan. And the least expensive way to obtain a solar system is a direct purchase. distributed generation of energy is growing rapidly in the United States, and it's expected to continue to grow. There's a generational shift towards solar energy. The younger generations are very in tune with it. And one of the driving costs of that is that solar panels have been dropping in cost. New York State is one of the top states for solar, believe it or not. And it has nothing to do with cloudiness. Germany is one of the cloudiest countries in the world, and it is the world leader in solar power production. And they did it with Jimmy Carter's feed-in tariff. Solar is a great investment for organizations, businesses. I think Dave will get more into that. It gives a strong return on the investment. But I think the environment is just as important as the return on investment. They're pushing the economics of it, and that's great that solar has that. But it offsets carbon production at fossil fuel plants. It helps mitigate an oxygen depletion that's been going on since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And nature tends to bring all things into balance. If anything interferes with that balance, nature will try to remove that interference. We need to work with nature, not against it. We'll be the ones needing saving, not the earth.
Your mother called, and she said, use solar power. So my name's Gay Knuff. I'm from ETM Solar Works. We're down in Endicott, New York. This is our 26th year in business. And we have been doing photovoltaics, solar electricity. That's where we started. We also do solar hot water heating, and we do install small wind as well, although, as Phil said, there's not very many good places for wind. So most of our business is solar. And I'm going to focus tonight on the commercial end of solar. We do residential and commercial and municipal solar. This is the ultimate solar power plant. This is where you put your solar array in geosynchronous orbit, where you get sun 24 hours a day, and you beam the power back to Earth with wireless power transmission. Now, this technology, as wild and woolly as it seems, was fully developed in the 1960s. It's just that in this country we have chosen not to spend money on space development. We have chosen to spend it on other things, like war, for example. So we could do this, but we don't have any space transportation infrastructure to do it. In fact, we're in such bad shape, we have to hitch a ride from the Russians just to get to the space station. But as I was doing this, I started out, our company name, ETM. ETM stands for Extraterrestrial Materials. And I actually did aerospace consulting work in the beginning. So that's how I got involved with space solar power, and how I got involved in solar power, coming back down to Earth to do terrestrial solar power. Because I was doing a study for NASA on space solar power, and I learned that, in fact, we have plenty of physical space on Earth to do solar, at least in the near term. Until we get to the stage where we have so much solar going on that we either need to have storage, because the sun is only up on Earth for, half a day, or we need to go space solar. So in 1993, I came back down to Earth, and I decided, okay, we're going to do terrestrial solar power, and I started getting into that. Now, I learned over time that the widespread use of solar is inevitable because of three things. Number one, solar cells are made of silicon, which is the second most common element on Earth. Number two, the solar resource is absolutely enormous. The amount of solar energy falling on the land area of Earth every year is 1,400 times larger than the world energy use. Now, by contrast, the forever supply of natural gas is 100 times less than the yearly amount of solar energy falling on Earth.
So if you were an extraterrestrial being and you were cruising by planet Earth, here we are, awash in mass quantities of solar energy. And what are we doing? We are digging stuff up out of the ground and burning it. Really? Is there intelligent life down here? I don't know. Are we getting into the Galactic Federation? Not so sure. The third fact is the area question. It takes 0.07% of the world's land area covered with solar cells to produce 100% of our electricity. Now, to bring that a little closer to home, in the United States, if we wanted to produce 100% of our electricity with solar, we would need about 12,000 square kilometers of solar cells, which is about the size of the Nevada test site and range. So it doesn't take a huge amount of area either. Everything is lining up. And that is what's driving the growth in the solar industry, which is pretty substantial. And there's been years, in the last 5 years, there have been years where it doubled from one year to the next as far as the deployment goes. That's just in the United States. Keeping in mind that we're behind. Germany's ahead of us, other European countries are ahead of us, Asia's ahead of us, but still, it is growing, and we are creating jobs. In fact, the solar sector is creating jobs at a rate of about 19%, whereas the economy overall is only about 2%. And even at our little company in Endicott, we hired 3 new people this year, and I'm looking for another person right now. So even we're creating jobs right here. Now, part of this is happening because the cost of solar cells has dropped dramatically over time. This graph goes way back to 1977, when the cost of a solar cell was $76 per watt. Okay, so if you had a 1 watt solar cell, which was about 2 inches in diameter, it cost $76. As opposed to today, when the cost of that same solar cell is 76 cents per watt. All right, so the cost has gone down dramatically. Even in the last 5 years, the cost of the systems has gone down by about a factor of 2. And that means that for your house, the solar electric system is now cheaper than an automobile, even without any incentives whatsoever. And by the time you apply the incentives, it's cheaper than a motorbike. So what is holding back? And as Dave mentioned, there's a lot of financing options too. Upstate has kind of started to wake up. Dave alluded to the incentives. This is the graph of how the incentives are going. And every time we get to the top here on this graph, the incentive level goes down by 10 cents a watt. So they opened up the commercial megawatt block at $1 a watt on the left here. And in about 2 months, it was down to 90 cents a watt. 3 weeks later, it was down to 80 cents a watt. So there's a lot of commercial solar going on, and the residential solar is going pretty fast also. And we're ahead of the other regions in the state. There's Con Ed and Long Island are the other 2 regions. So we're really cranking on the solar here in upstate. This is just a picture of what a larger system looks like, and this is at SUNY Brockport. It's kind of interesting. When I first started doing non-residential, we did NYSERDA solar on schools, which we did 2 kilowatt systems, and everybody thought that was really exciting. This was about 10 years ago now. Well, then I did a solar on schools for the New York Power Authority, and they did 7 kilowatt systems, and everybody was really excited. Well, in 2011, we did some more solar on schools for 50 kilowatt systems. Well, that was a little better, but that's still a drop in the bucket for how much electricity they need. Well, now things are really changing. Even this one, which is 80 kilowatts, well, that served a decent part of that one building, but it's still small. Well, now things are really happening, and people are starting to build 1,000 kilowatt systems and 2,000 kilowatt systems here, and out west, they're into the 200,000 kilowatt systems out west. So they're building what's called utility scale solar, so not just to feed a building, but to actually be a power plant. Now let's think about this a minute. If you build a power plant of any kind, if you build an itty-bitty one, a little home-sized one, it's going to be more expensive than if you build a great big one. So in some ways, it's no mystery that small home solar is more expensive than utility power, at least it has been, until recently. It's starting to change. But fact is, though, that if you build a bigger power plant of any kind, it's going to be cheaper. So going to these larger systems, it's less expensive kilowatt hours. On the commercial side, there's a lot of different sectors of that. There are farms, there are quite a few farms that are going solar. We've got some wineries that are going solar. There's another school down in Albany. So, and even right here in Otsego County, they are working on a fairly, quite a lot bigger system. I think it's a couple of megawatts, a couple thousand kilowatts that they're going to build to feed the county. So that'd be a municipal system. There's a hockey, this is a county thing in Albany. And then municipalities. We've had a lot of interest by municipalities in solar because they and businesses can do this thing called remote net metering. And this is a neat thing. They can put their solar array, look, this particular town has 5 or 6 meters. So they have their garage, they have the street lighting, they have the village hall, they have some other buildings. Well, they can put their solar array all on the garage and get credit to all their other meters via remote net metering. Well, that's nice because it's less expensive to build the single monolithic array than it is to build a whole bunch of smaller ones. And this garage has a great site. There's no shade on it anywhere. Okay, so we've talked to a number of municipalities to do this, and then the financing for them is also a pretty neat thing, and I'll come to that in a second here. Dave already mentioned about the lowering the cost of racking. The cost of the solar cells has gone down, and now what we're doing is we're struggling to lower other costs, such as the racks and the inverters and the time it takes to install it. So this pound and post thing is not only cheaper for the materials, but it's also cheaper for the labor. So that's lowering the cost more. Anybody recognize this spot? This is nearby. It's the Oxford water treatment plant. So we've been talking to them for a while to try to get them interested in some solar. When we first started talking to them, though, we really didn't have real good financing options, but now that has changed. So, of course, everybody can do net metering and can do remote net metering, and Dave explained that pretty well, how that all works. But what's really new for the commercial world and the municipal world are these power purchase agreements, which means no upfront cost. So when you leave this presentation, if there's one thing you remember no upfront cost. That is where things are going with solar, and even for the commercial and municipal world. So who's doing it? Well, here's some companies that are doing this. They are going solar. So this is not a new thing. I think one of the barriers I've run into with the municipals is they all think this is a new thing and they don't want to be first. Well, it's not a new thing. It's not. There are big companies like Walmart, the kings of cheap. Hey, if they're doing it, it must be a good deal, right? So lots of these big companies are going solar because what they're finding is that it's cheaper than sticking with the utility. Surprise. One of the, I'll put a plug in here for Jan. She's from Sunvestment Group. We are working with them for the power purchase agreement financing, and they have this really cool concept of using community investors, using local investors rather than just going to the big banks. And it's called a community PPA. So how does a PPA work? Well, PPA, or power purchase agreement, means that somebody owns the system, usually not the host site. So it's generally owned by an investor or a collection of investors and they own the system, install it, so we team up with them, so we're the installer, and we do the maintenance, and they supply the money. And what does the host site do? The host site pays a certain amount of cents per kilowatt hour for the electricity. And they are given a deal where their cost per kilowatt hour is anywhere from 15 to 30% less than they are paying now. That is the nature of all these power purchase agreements, that they're going to be paying less than they're paying now, and they're getting their rates set for the next 20 years. Okay, so that is a really nice thing for a municipality. Now they have certainty about their utility rate, or a business or anybody has certainty about your utility rate. The utility has been, their rates have been going up on average 5% per year. So wouldn't it be nice if you knew what your rate was going to be for the next 20 years and it wasn't going to go up, or if it did, it was a agreed upon small amount in the power purchase agreement, right? Smaller than what the utility would be. Okay, so there's the host site, the financier and installer, and the financier installer, what we do is we're going to set up a solar project LLC that owns the system and collects the payments and does the maintenance and all that. So the host site, the municipality or business, all you're doing is buying kilowatt hours. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to do maintenance. You don't have to worry about the system. You don't have to come up with upfront money. All you're going to do is buy kilowatt hours, and they're going to be cheaper than what you're paying now. So what's not to like? Right? Now, not only that, if you go with the Sunvestment folks and us, then we're going to try to do a community PPA. So not only are you going to have a lower electric rate, but the return on investment, this money that the investors are going to get, they're going to make money on the money they put into this system, and it's their local people. So you got money staying in the community. You're not sending it to Wall Street. You're not sending it to California. So that is really exciting to me. And I've been on the tour, going around talking to lots of municipalities to try to get them signed up to this. So this graph kind of sums up the cost part of this. This red line here is the average annual increase in utility rates. The other dotted lines are what if the utility rate went up a little less, what if it went up a little more, and the green line here is your power purchase agreement. In that case, that one had a 2%, I think it was a 2% escalator, but that was still well under the 4.5% typical utility rate increase. So again, this makes it really, really easy for these bigger systems for the people to go solar. And we're really excited about that. It's starting to happen here. It's already happening out west. It's happened quite a lot in New Jersey already. New York, we are finally in the top 10 of the solar states. But if you look at how we stack up next to California, it's still pretty small. We still have more than 10 times less installed capacity in New York than in California. And then finally, when there's a huge solar energy spill, no problem, right? No problem. All right, I think we'll go to questions after this. So I guess if you guys could come up, we're going to have questions. This is our MC.
Sit up there. And you're just...
Okay, you could turn your index cards in if you wrote questions and you're not comfortable asking them yourselves, or we'll just kind of call on people from the audience if you have a question. And I want to remind you that there are refreshments, plenty of them, after the question and answer period. So don't ask too many, no, I'm kidding. Questions?
My question is to Dave. Dave, you mentioned that it's optimal for the resident to have the anniversary date right after winter. Now, when you call, I know from my experience, when I call NYSEG with any information I need, they don't know much more about it than I do. So where is it that you call? Is there a special sub-part of the NYSEG, or who is it that you do?
Yes, you have to call the distributed generation department, where NICEAG's concerned that would be Lori. You should ask your installer. We'll tell you who that person is.
We got it.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, they have a comment. Good.
Another question?
This is for anyone. Is a small homeowner, a single-family homeowner, prohibited from producing electricity for on the grid? I mean, if I wanted to put in a 25 kilowatt solar panel, am I prohibited from putting that out on the grid?
No, you're not. You're encouraged to put it out on the grid. That's the purpose of net metering, is so that you're credited at the same retail rate that you pay them. What you're discouraged from is grossly oversizing the system. It needs to be matched to the kilowatt hours that you use in the year. Anybody else have anything else?
Right, but if I wanted to produce electricity for the grid separate from my home, am I prohibited from doing that?
Yeah, as a business unit, that's a whole other entity. You know, it's based on an existing service. So maybe Dave would know more about how to do that.
Well, the answer is you can do it, but now you're a solar power plant. You're a power plant. And the first thing you have to consider is you're going to be selling your electricity now at the wholesale rate into the market. And in order to do that and make money at it, you're probably going to have to build a pretty big system. And by pretty big, I mean probably 10,000 kilowatts. I mean, that's pretty big. And then you're going to have to join the independent system operator, which means you're going to have to, which is what all the what all the power plants do. You're going to have to fill out a lot of paperwork to do that, which of course costs money. You probably have to buy a substation, build a substation, feed into the grid. So, it's not that you can't do it, but you got to do it big to kind of make it worthwhile.
Questions?
Yeah, when you talk about net metering, if you calculate your present electric cost, let's say it's 10 or 12 cents a kilowatt hour, what you pay in your bill, do you get that 12 cents back, or do you just get that minus the delivery charge back?
Generation plus delivery. And since they're crediting you kilowatt hours for month to month, everything on your bill that is per kilowatt hour is being offset.
Including the delivery charge?
The delivery charge, the surcharges, the supply charges, the taxes on the delivery, everything.
Basically, the only thing is the basic service charge.
Yeah, your basic service charge, that is not. So that basic service charge, that $15.11 to be hooked up to the grid is not per kilowatt hour. So that's not offset. But if you generated more than you used for the whole year, at the end of the year, they're going to give you $1 credit now to the next year. And then that, since you've generated enough, we do have a few people that are generating enough extra that they're offsetting the dollar amount of that basic service charge too.
This gentleman right here, I think, has a question.
Has Gay or Dave been in a situation, this is a weird one, where it would be advantageous for this municipality, this town that I'm in, to work with the fire district, because the biggest building is, and the best solar site is the fire department. But the town board shares space in that same building. So we got stopped by someone who said, well, it's going to be a problem working the two entities, governmental entities together, and someone else in the comptroller's office says 5G, Article 5Gs are done all the time, but then the legal department in the comptroller's office says, oh, well, we're going to have to review it, and that was 8 months ago. Have you ever encountered that kind of difficulty before?
Well, actually, that's, there's difficulties at different levels there. There's, for remote net metering, that's probably the trickiest thing.
Yeah, we
When it
want
comes
to
to
do that too.
remote net metering, all of the meters have to be in the same name. Okay, so if all meters have the town as the name, great. Now you're golden. But if some of the meters are owned by the fire department and some by the town, okay, that's a problem. So that's kind of from a remote net metering perspective. From an incentive perspective, no problem, because incentives are given per meter. Okay, so, you don't have to worry about that. It doesn't really matter, this doesn't matter who owns it, it's per meter. So if the town has 5 meters, they can get 5 incentives. The fire department has 2 meters, they can get 2 incentives. So there's 2 different kinds of difficulties there. And the remote net metering is that's probably the thing we've run into the most trouble with. We had a church, for example, has a building across the street from the main church. And I thought, oh, well, they have a big roof there. We can put up with a system to serve both buildings and remote net meter across the street. Except for the problem that a church meter is a residential meter. And the utility won't let a residence remote net meter, even though it's clearly not a residence. This is a rule thing.
Have you ever managed to finagle a name change so that the two can meld
Yep,
together?
yep. No, that's happened most of the time with farms where you have a barn and it's owned in the farm name, and you have a house that's owned in the person's name, but it's really the same person, and then they just simply change they just put the name of the barn in their name instead of the farm name, or vice versa. So, yeah.
Question in the back there?
Everything I own breaks at one time or another. And I noticed that in your analysis, your financial analysis, everything was based on investment, but I didn't see anything on cost of maintenance, repairs, and that sort of thing. Do you have any kind of estimates of what those are annually?
Well, let me just tell you that for the commercial side, the cost of maintenance is included in our analysis. So we actually put in dollar amounts, and it's like probably 0.5% per year for maintenance. So let me see if Dave wants to say something about residential maintenance.
In our financial analysis, we had something for that too. The truth is, of all the renewable energy, solar has the least maintenance. I'm not going to say it's maintenance free, but really the only maintenance is keeping the panels clean, pressure washing them every couple of years, and maybe solar panels last longer than inverters generally. You should allow something for replacement or rebuilding of an inverter, say halfway through the life of the system. I would think it's the same for commercial, just more of them.
Watch out for tree shading, right? And watch out for
Yeah,
tree
keep trees cut back.
Question, another question over there to this gentleman midway.
What happens during the winter time with the snow on the panels? Do you need to literally go out and brush off the snow, or what happens?
That's one of the beauties of net metering, is that you can build credits during the summer towards your winter bills. And the summer is your peak production. And you can still produce something in the winter, but if the panels happen to be covered with snow, it doesn't make that much difference. And if the steeper they are, the faster they'll shed the snow by themselves. The actual time compared to the rest of the year that panels are covered with snow is small. The percentage is small. It's not worth risking your life to go up on a roof to clear the panels of snow if you're on the grid. If you're off the grid, on the other hand, then you've got to use the power or lose it, and it becomes more critical. But generally, those arrays are smaller.
And all of you are very up to date, and we appreciate your knowledge. I'm looking a little further into the future. The whole nature of the solar cell is changing. Some inventors have been successful recently at actually embedding a different type of wiring system in a very thin film which can be applied to windows.
So if this, well, initially they're going to start with Android phones, etc., so that they can make use of the solar recharge. But if this expands, then every window in every structure could become a solar producer. Imagine that.
Thank you. Any more questions?
I'll just give a comment about the future there.
Sorry.
The fact is that until very recently, we have not invested very much research money into solar. Now that has changed quite a lot with Mr. Obama. He's actually invested probably 1,000 times more than was ever invested before. So, you know, we could do a lot if we put in an effort. So now for our purposes, things aren't going to change, like the efficiency of solar cells, that changes very slowly. So if you buy something today, it's still going to be producing 30, 35 years from now. It's not like a computer that's going to be obsolete and you can't do anything with it. It's going to keep producing. So, you know, you can do it now and not worry about some fabulous thing coming out next year that's going to supplant it. But what we're going to see is we're going to see a lot more solar, and it is continuing to get less expensive. Like anything, if you do more of it, it gets less expensive. There's been a big push in New York for programs, they're called solarized programs. Jan Myers is involved in one in Madison County, to get more people aware of solar and going solar, which lowers the soft costs, you know, the costs of paperwork and installing and customer acquisition and all those costs. And hence lowers the cost of systems to everybody. So that is kind of where we're going in the future. We're going to lower costs and mass deployment, and that in turn is going to, of course, there's the new technology that's going to be in the mix with new kinds of solar cells and new ways of putting them on, like in Windows. So it's an exciting time.
Okay, we have time for just a few more questions.
Yes, I own an investment property next door to me in Guilford, and I already talked with Gay about putting up solar mounts, but because it wasn't my primary residence, I was not allowed by the financing branch of solar to pre-lease and also to qualify for those tax credits, I guess. And I spoke to someone at Grassroots who's been in solar for many years. He says, I'll never find that anywhere. It's not just locally that I cannot. So why is that? Or has there hopefully been a change?
Okay, so what you're talking about is for residential, you have to lease, and for most loans, the same story. You have to be the owner and live in the residence in order to get loans and leases. And this has to do with skittishness of banks. You know, this is a risk thing. That banks, you know, they think that if you own a house and you have a tenant, and that tenant leaves, and now you're not collecting rent, that you're not going to pay your lease or your loan. So this has to do with skittishness of banks, and it's kind of out of our hands. We can't really do anything about that. I don't know if that's going to change for the residential side. There's been a lot of effort, and even NYSERDA is putting in some effort on this, trying to figure out how to serve renters, because, right, a lot of people rent, and, well, gosh, it'd be nice if they could get financing for their solar electric system. There's nothing, you know, all they got to do is get the permission of the building owner to be able to put it on there, but they can't get financing. Well, that's just not fair. So NYSERDA is working on that in their Green Bank program, and they're going around talking to banks and trying to find a solution to that issue, because there are a lot of renters, and there's more all the time. So, yeah.
Another question?
I haven't heard anything about battery technology. Does battery usage have any role in this, either for emergency electricity or for overnight production or storage of electricity?
Battery backup is an option for those that have critical loads that need to be powered during power outages. The latest way of doing that is something called AC coupling. And we've been doing that for several years now. I'm amazed every time I turn on one of those systems. It's not supposed to work, but it does. You know, the anti-islanding, it effectively defeats the anti-islanding, where the grid tie inverter backfeeds the battery-based inverter, and it powers the critical loads first, and then if there's extra, this is all during a power outage, the extra goes back and recharges the battery. It's quite fascinating. Battery technology, the newest technology is still quite expensive. And we're still working with lead-acid batteries, basically. But we're watching. I keep hearing year after year from some of the battery-based inverter manufacturers that next year you will see it coming on the market with something better. We're still watching.
One of the other options, real quickly, pretty much all the systems that go in today do not use batteries because they're expensive and you have to maintain them, which is a continual recurring expense. So what I tell a lot of people who are interested in battery systems is you can do the same thing somebody would do if they don't have a solar system and just use a generator. You know, a generator might only be running for 1 to 2, 3 hours out of the year, and during that time, most of the time, you can make do one way, shape, or form. So it's really only if you have true critical needs and you're worried about fuel access and things like that. So when Superstorm Sandy came through, there's been a much bigger push toward AC coupling systems just for those kinds of scenarios now. But generators are still always an option, and they're quite economically viable.
Can I just add? Not that I know anything, but if you've been listening to the news and reading the articles, Binghamton University is adding to their chemistry and physics department, I think, in the battery and solar cell research. So again, for career development for our young people and those of us more mature who want a Chapter 2 career, that's an exciting possibility for hopefully lowering costs for batteries in the very near future, and also local within our area. And that's the exciting part about career development for our young people and for our students. You can get trained and live here and work here and add to our economy forever, not for a very short time, and not flying in and flying out when productivity is up in some other forms of energy. So that's really exciting. One last question.
Political question, really, but do you think there's any chance that New York State might go the way to Massachusetts? You know, Massachusetts put in what they call a solar credit system. It really seems more like a feed-in tariff system where small producers really can make money putting up, say, a 10 or kilowatt system and just selling it back to the utility and making money. And I understand that Lilco, they were allowed to do something like that on Long Island. Do you know about that? Do you have any predictions or anything?
You're more in touch with her than I see it.
Well, the feed-in tariff idea, this is how Germany's solar deployment got so big. It's a tried and true program. They did massive deployment of solar. They're still doing it. They created tons of jobs. They lowered the cost of solar. They did all these wonderful things. The New York Solar Energy Industries Association has been pushing for the same kind of incentive in New York for the last more than 5 years. and basically all we get is, we can't do that here. Why not? Well, we just can't do that here. I don't know. It's really a little bit annoying. We did try for the solar renewable energy credit instead of the feed-in tariff. We tried calling it something different. They just politically, it is just an uphill battle, which is really annoying because it worked so well in Germany. But I gotta give NYSERDA and the PSC credit though, because the system that we do have, which is our rebate system, it is working fairly well. I mean, it's going slow, But, you know, slow isn't always bad. You know, if you go for sort of sustained orderly development, where you don't, because if you go too fast, that can be a problem too. It is working. We are getting a lot of solar deployed in New York. So, one thing I'll tell you though, on the legislative side, is when you hear about remote net metering, we've got a bill out there in the Assembly and the Senate to enable residential remote net metering, so that you could buy into a solar array out in somebody's field, okay? That legislation is in play, and this upcoming session, I think we have a very good chance of getting it passed. This will be the 4th year we're trying. This is how things work in New York. You have to spend years and years and years. I think it took 10 years, something like that, before we got the first net metering bill passed back in 1997. So, but you think, you know, the leap from commercial remote net metering to residential isn't that big, so we think you have a good chance there. So that'll be your chance to get involved in politics.
We'd like to thank our speakers. And please have great conversation, great refreshments, and sit around and enjoy the information. Refreshments will be in the cafeteria. Thank you.